Hello everyone, I'm Soledad Davies from PsicoCymática, an e-learn platform of astrology and transpersonal consciousness. I'm here with Richard Tarnas. Hello, Rick.
Hello, good to see you, Soledad. Thank you for arranging this today for us, with you in one country and me here in another country in California.
As a start, your book, Cosmos and Psyche, is very well known among the astrological community. But your previous book, The Passion of the Western Mind, maybe not. So I would like if you can tell us about your background and how you came across with astrology.
Sure. I went to university in the 1960s at Harvard University, and I studied both the history of Western thought there, but I also studied depth psychology, Jung, and in particular Freud and Jung, but also I studied psychedelic research, because the psychedelic revolution was very much happening then in the 1960s. And so I then went from Harvard on the East Coast of the United States to California on the West Coast, because I heard about the work of Stanislav Grof, who was at that point the scholar in residence at Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California. And I went to study with him and working on my PhD there. And I ended up being there for over 10 years, and I became the director of programs there at Esalen. But during those years...
Sorry, what was your PhD about?
The PhD was in psychology. The PhD was in psychology, and my dissertation was on the relationship of, or the use of psychedelic substances like LSD as a support for psychotherapy and experiences of spiritual rebirth, spiritual transformation. So it was within the psychology tradition, but also drawing on the recent work that is again becoming very popular, involving the use of sacred medicines like ayahuasca, mushrooms, the peyote, but also LSD, to use that in a psychotherapeutic way, which Groff's work, Stan Groff's work, showed how very powerful spiritual experiences that often emerged during these psychedelic sessions, if they're in a carefully prepared environment, that they could have powerful psychologically healing effects. And so while I was working with Stan there, we discovered that the best way of understanding both the quality of individuals' experiences, the archetypal character of those experiences, and the timing of them, was through astrology. And before that time, we didn't believe that astrology had real validity. We thought it was, a kind of interesting, ancient practice. But we knew that Jung had studied astrology, so we had some sense that it at least had symbolic value. But we were amazed to discover that it was the most helpful psychological tool for understanding why different people have such different experiences using the exact same drug or the exact same medicine, or vision plants. At different times they have different experiences. Also, different people have different experiences even at the same time. And we came to understand that what was most important was to see what the individual person's transits were. That is, where the planets were in the sky in relationship to their birth chart. And that as those come together in different ways, different archetypal powers and experiences and complexes get constellated, they get activated. And we found it extremely helpful for understanding people's sessions, including our own, which we had good records for going back decades. So this was the beginning of my astrological research. I wanted to bring some of these discoveries to the world to describe them, but I knew that everybody else within the academic world would be skeptical about astrology, just as I had been and Stan had been. And so I thought I will first write a book that will establish a credibility, establish a reason that people might think that I could be taken seriously. And so I wrote The Passion of the Western Mind, which is it's a history of Western thought and of our changing views of the cosmos and of the human being's relationship to the cosmos. And I also trace the evolution of the archetypal perspective, going from ancient mythology to Plato and Plato's view of the archetypal transcendent forms or ideas, which are really like cosmic ideas. And following that history all the way up until Carl Gustav Jung in the 20th century recovered that understanding of archetypes and recognized the archetypes as shaping the human psyche and the unconscious. And so I published that book, and Passion of the Western Mind, and it became widely used in universities as a textbook for philosophy courses, including in Spanish speaking countries. Like I've lectured in Mexico, for example.
Yeah, the book is translated into Spanish, so I recommend to people to read it.
Thank you. So after that, then I was a professor and I was teaching a lot, but I kept working on Cosmos and Psyche, and then I brought it out about 12 years ago.
Yeah. Actually, when Cosmos and Psyche was published, Jupiter was in Scorpio as it is now. So it's a whole cycle of Jupiter.
That's right.
So that brings you any thoughts or reveals you something?
Yeah, it's the Jupiter return, as we say in astrology, of Cosmos and Psyche. Yeah. Well, the fact that there's a movie, a documentary being made based on the book about our time. It's a movie called Changing of the Gods that may, in a way, bring Cosmos and Psyche to more people through the film video, watching on TV, and so forth.
So what is the relationship between the participatory epistemology, that's your idea at the end of your book, The Passion of the Western Mind, and archetypal astrology and human psyche? How is all of this related?
Well, that's a good question, and it's a complicated one.
Yes.
But of course, the basic idea, if we look through the history of Western thought, Western philosophy, particularly in Europe, but also as it spread throughout the world in the modern era, there is a development of our understanding of how we know things, and that's what epistemology is how do we know what is true, what is real. And with the modern mind having been so shaped by what we could call the Cartesian, René Descartes' view that the mind and the world are separate, and that the human mind has one reality, and then the world outside us is mindless. It's just matter and energy that we would know as an object. And so this basic split between the subject and the object in knowledge creates a big problem that philosophers had to face, which is, how do we know what's really true if the knower is so different from the known? How do we cross that bridge from subject to object? And when we started realizing in the study of astrology that the archetypal principles that structure the human mind also seem to be connected to the planets and the sun and the moon, to the great cosmos, we came to realize that there was an underlying unity between the human psyche, the human soul and mind, and the world, even to the great cosmos itself. And this was kind of a revelation that is similar to Jung's idea of synchronicity, where in synchronicities, events happen in the outside world that have a meaning that is amazingly like the meaning of what's going on inside the person's mind. And Jung's experience of many synchronicities and his research convinced him finally that there was an underlying unity between the world of the material world studied by natural science and the psychological world of the human mind that's studied by psychology. And he said there's that the archetypal forms, the archetypes, inform both inside and outside. And he gave lots of examples of that. And in a way, astrology points to the fact that these archetypes and synchronicities are happening all the time in a kind of grand cosmic way. And so when we bring this back to the study of epistemology and how we know, then one of the things we come to realize is that we have to cultivate, develop our our inner self, our inner depths, in order to better know the depths of the world, to better participate in the inner reality, the inner truth of the world. Because the modern assumption has been that the world doesn't have an inside. It's only out. You only look at the outside. You only look at matter. We're now coming to realize that all things are ensouled, that there is an anima mundi, a soul of the world, anima mundi, and we are able to know the world by actively participating with our interior perception in the inner archetypal reality, symbolic meanings of the world itself. That's my best explanation.
Yeah, well, a very good one. Yeah. So this is you were saying in other lectures and classes that civilization or humankind is undergoing a very deep transformation. Is related to this?
Yes, I think. I mean, we all recognize that we're in a planetary crisis today, and the crisis has many different aspects. I mean, economic crises, social, political, but especially important are the ecological crisis. Many, whether it's climate change, the death of many species, the extreme weather events, etc., and pollution. So there's an ecological crisis, but there's also a kind of spiritual and philosophical crisis that humanity is going through. In a way, we're looking at a whole identity crisis. Human beings are having to rethink who we are in the Earth community and who we are in the cosmos, because the assumption that we are the only intelligence in the world, and that we can act on the world as kind of the superior ruler, and that we can use the world for our benefit, as if everything, animals, trees, the ocean, as if all these are just objects, resources that we can use our technology, extract what we want from them, and then that's it, because we're the only conscious, rational, moral beings in the known cosmos. Therefore, it gives us license to do whatever we want. And we're now realizing that that is a very destructive and even suicidal strategy to approach the world with. And so I think we need to move out of that objectifying kind of approach to the world and move into a more respectful participation in the larger Earth community.
Yeah, that's why I think that this participatory epistemology, to realize that we are participants of the cosmos, can bring a very deep transformation in our relationship with ecology and the world in general, our approach to life and others, no?
Very much.
Yeah, and what do you think is the role, if it has, of astrology on this?
Yes. Yeah. You know, I think we can, as I approach your question, I think of the last thing that you just said about it changes how we, not just how we relate to the world, but how we relate to each other too.
Mm-hmm.
And because many people in the modern world will relate to other people as objects, as means to ends, to make money off them, etc. And we know that if we approach a relationship, let's say in a love relationship, if you approach the other person as if you are definitely superior and the person who should get the most benefit from the relationship, and you approach the other person as being someone who's just there to serve you and who's just an object, that's not going to be a very meaningful relationship. And it will make the other person, the other person is not going to show their depth of who they are to us. Well, it's the same thing with the rest of the world and the rest of the cosmos. If we approach the rest of the world and the cosmos as being nothing but a stupid, unintelligent, unconscious, purposeless, meaningless object that's there for our benefit, well, we may not be seeing the inner reality of the world and of the cosmos, and it may it won't show it to us. It'll be blocked from our vision. We'll be blind. We'll be seeing through a glass darkly, and so in that way, this crisis we're going through, I think, is a crisis where we are having to kind of die to our old identity and open up to the wider, deeper mystery of life. And astrology helps us because it provides us with powerful evidence, first, that intelligence informs the whole universe. It's not just in the human mind. As anybody who has studied astrology deeply enough knows, it leaves one in awe, in kind of wordless admiration and wonder that the cosmos is capable of orchestrating the movements of the planets and the patterns of our own life experience in a way that is like the greatest symphony ever composed. You know, it's so intelligent. It allows the human being to go, oh, I'm part of something that's much bigger, that's so intelligent, and I'm being asked to participate in that. I'm not the only game in town. Okay, but astrology also provides another tool.
It's like the crisis from Leo to Virgo.
What was that?
It's like the crisis from Leo to Virgo, what you are saying.
Yeah, you could say that's right. That's true. And then a second way in which astrology provides a special help to us in this crisis is that by understanding our own birth charts, our horoscope, and by understanding our personal transits, we get an insight into how we are unconsciously moved by these powerful forces, and that gives us we can become more conscious that way. We can become more skillful, intelligent participants rather than blind puppets of the unconscious. And we can also see our shadow better, because you can get insights into how we might be projecting certain things onto another person, and not seeing them accurately. We could get insights into how we might be unconsciously setting up situations in our lives that are not serving us, that are more destructive, because we were blind, because we were unconscious. And finally, astrology also gives us that, by understanding the world transits, like where the planets are for everybody, each year, each month, each decade, we get insights into how the zeitgeist changes, how the spirit of the time is changing, and we get to see certain patterns in history. For example, our time right now has, for the last 10 years or so, has been going through a Uranus-Pluto square, and that energy is very powerful. Radical change of all sorts, disruptions, political, social, economic turmoil, rebellion, striving for reforms, for change, for liberation, greater technological intense advance, and disruptive effects. Many other things tend to go with it. Political will to power, that can, where there's kind of more authoritarian and populist demagogic leaders can arise. And we see all these qualities that have been going on the last 10 years. They're very related to that Uranus-Pluto archetypal combination. And the last time that they were in close aspect was the 1960s and early 70s, when Uranus and Pluto were in conjunction. And the time before that, when they were in a square, like now, was the 1930s. And in many ways, you could say that our time right now can be seen as a kind of, in some ways, it's a lot like the 1930s, and in other ways, it's a lot like the 1960s. Both of them are very relevant to our current time. And so we get insights by studying history astrologically that can't come any other way. It gives us an understanding of the archetypal powers that are at work in each era.
Yeah, to understand deeper our moment, no, in history and socially. Yes. You pay more attention to transits and planets, planetary transits, but not to signs. You don't talk much about signs. Why? Do you see that is more relevant, the planetary transit, that the sign of the planet?
Yeah, I mean, I think the signs are important. They give a certain character to the planetary energy. They're like a flavor or coloring, a color that shifts the quality of the archetypal power and energy that the planet represents. There's a couple of reasons why I tend to focus. I'm a kind of bridge figure between the astrology world and the world outside astrology. People, especially in the academic world, the scholarly world, there's lots of problems in understanding how the signs work because of the the changing of the zodiacs, you know, the precession of the equinoxes, the difference between the sidereal zodiac and the tropical zodiac. That creates a lot of conceptual problems. That's why a lot of skeptics will say, well, astrology is just nonsense because they're working with constellations that aren't even there anymore. When I combine that with the fact that what seems to be, when Stan Groff and I were doing our research, and also when we look at history itself, what seems to be most important is to see what planets are in aspect to each other and what are those aspects. Because having a let's say a Uranus-Pluto conjunction, or even let's say in a person's natal chart, birth chart, if they have let's say a Moon-Pluto conjunction or a Moon-Saturn conjunction, it's much more important to know that they have that conjunction or that the world's going through that conjunction. It's more important to know that than to know what sign it's in. To know that like the Uranus-Pluto conjunction in Virgo is very similar in many ways to a Uranus-Pluto conjunction that happened in Aries in the 19th century. You still get all the revolutionary energies. You get you still get like the women's movement during the Uranus-Pluto conjunction in the 1848 period, in 1840s, early 1850s, when Uranus and Pluto were last conjunct. That was in the 19th century. And then in the 20th century, the Uranus and Pluto in the 1960s come into conjunction again, but in a different sign. And there's more similarities between, let's say, the women's movement emerges in 1848 for women's voting, women's suffrage, etc. And then in the 1960s, it's again rises very powerfully. Same thing with political revolutionary movements and rebellions. Swept the world in the 1840s and 50s, and again in the 1960s. It's more important to know about the conjunction than it is to know about the sign. The sign plays a role, it colors it, but it's not as important, I think. And particularly in presenting this evidence to a wider public, I try to present it in a way that is more immediately understandable than once you start bringing in signs and houses and rulerships, it gets very complicated on top of the planets, the aspects, etc. So I have, like each astrologer develops their own, I think we each have a particular window into the mystery. And I share with the world the window that opened up for me, and that has them. But other astrologers can see the signs so vividly, and they can communicate that, and that's very important. Others will focus on the elements, that might, or others might focus more on the houses, etc. So it's each astrologer has their own gift.
To know the deep structures of psychology is to know the structure of the cosmos. That is, cosmos and psyche is the same structure.
Yeah. It's a big surprise, because we are taught in our education to think that the psyche is one thing and the cosmos is another thing, and they're very far from each other. We're taught this one is inner, the other is outer, and don't mix them up. But so many of current sciences are recognizing that it's much more complex than that, and that animals and plants, for example, other than human beings, have a kind of consciousness, and there's even a moral development in many animals, and just all the different ways in which we have in quantum physics come to see how interrelated the subject and the object are, but also how mutually that there is a entanglement of an interconnection of all things all the time going on. So many sciences are starting to move towards a similar integrated worldview, just as we are talking about here in the integration of psychology and astrology as an integration of the human experience with the cosmos.
And this kind of integration is the same that you are doing in the CIS with archetypal cosmology, integrating different disciplines, right?
That's correct, yeah. In different, we bring it in with philosophy, we bring it in with the study of cosmology, and also in ecology. So yes, in fact, there is a book that I believe has just been released by the Spanish publisher Atalanta, that published the Spanish versions of Cosmos and Psyche and Passion of the Western Mind. There's a new book that just came out called The Archetypal Cosmos by Kieran Legris, and that book, he's somebody who came out of our CIIS as well, and he's now a professor at Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara, California. But he wrote a brilliant book that places archetypal astrology in the larger mix of other new paradigms that are emerging in the sciences today.
Yeah, I read it in English already, and I could realize that it's very informed by your program. Yeah.
Yeah. So they I just saw this morning.
That's great news.
Yeah, it just published today in Spanish edition.
Yeah, good. Well, Rick, I don't have more questions. I think. Well, thank you very much, Rick, for this conversation. I feel very honored to talk with you and to be able to translate your work into Spanish. I think that is a great idea that these kind of courses can go out of the academic context to a wider public. So I think that's great, and in every language it's possible.
I'm honored by our conversation with all your very good questions, and I'm so glad that you'll be able to bring this work to the Spanish-speaking world, which is a very big world.
Okay, yes. Thank you very much. Okay. And
thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.